So there are a lot of ways to set up your training program, but there is one principle that you must adhere to make sure that you don't reach a plateau and that you continue to improve. And that principle, it's called periodization. And what periodization it basically is meaning setting up your training in different phases. There is your macro cycle, which is the scope of the entire season or year for that matter. There's mesocycles, which will fit within the macro cycle that run for about 4 to 6 weeks, where you can work on a specific skill or a specific adaptation that you're trying to work on. And then there's a microcycle that fit within the mesocycles that are basically like the week within that 4 to 6 week program where you're setting up the different workouts. So the first thing you need to do before you set up any type of program or any type of periodization is to have a season goal. Have something that you want to train toward so you can create the adaptation that will best suit you for race day. And then what periodization really is, it's basically a changing of stimulus over time so that you can overload your system to improve while resting and recovering so you can absorb that training. A big mistake that a lot of endurance athletes will do is to continuously try to add and overload and just have one big long progression, or where they don't switch the stimulus at all. And that will eventually lead to a plateau and it will stall your progress. So having these periods in which you are set up to train hard and then rest is crucial to help with your continuous improvement. So after each mesocycle, which is those 4 to 6 week blocks, you'll need to take a down week. And a down week is usually just cutting the volume of your total week by 30 to 40% even, and just really giving yourself time to adjust and to rest. And in this video, we're going to take you through some progressions that are specifically for those mesocycles. So there's basically 2 ways that you can set up your periodization. There's linear, which is the most popular, and linear is basically set in a straight line. Specifically for endurance, that is generally the way that most training plans will be set up. And that is adding to your previous week of work so that you continuously get better, just adding a little bit more. And that could be in a couple of different elements. You could add with total volume for your linear progression. You could add intensity in your linear progression, or you could reduce your recovery. All of these things will create more of an overload for each workout so that you do continue to improve with each week. And then there is undulated progression, which is a little bit less used in the endurance community, but has shown to have phenomenal results in the strength and conditioning world with powerlifting and hypertrophy and bodybuilding. So there is a place for undulated progression, which is basically kind of a wave of your progression instead of a linear progression, which is just going to go in a straight line to harder and more intense, which is going to lead to the specific adaptation that you are hoping for. Undulated is going to take a little bit longer of time, and it's going to move up and down, where you're going to be doing high intensity one day and high volume another day and lower intensity. So they're going to switch based on your preference of working out and how long of time you have to take to set up these progressions. So I'm going to take you through a couple of different looks at these progressions, at what a linear progression is going to look like and what an undulated progression would look like. So here are examples of what it looks like in practice within Training Peaks, and how that these workouts are going to look in a linear and an undulated fashion. So in the scope of this video, we're just going to go straight across like the week and have these be the different workouts that you would set up for your week. This is not 1 week of training. This is set up over the course of 5 weeks of training. So these are what these workouts are going to look like. And again, these workouts are not built for anything specific, and they are meant to create an adaptation for that particular response. And so what that looks like is just kind of setting up. So within any macro cycle, you can have a phase where you want to work on 5K speed, 10K speed, or a half marathon speed, whatever it is you're training for. You can have a block within there that is help training other parts of your overall endurance so that you continue to improve, and that you're not just drilling at half marathon pace for 12 weeks when you have a half marathon coming up. So in this case, we have a 5K example, a marathon progression example, and a 10K example. And these can fit anywhere within your macro cycle. as long as it gives you enough time to set up an exact race-specific plan and specific speed and endurance for your event. So there's two types of ways to set up your linear progression, and that's top-down or bottom-up. So the first one we're going to look at is this first week is top-down for a 5K. And basically what that means is starting at a higher level of volume and sharpening your way down into your speed work that will lead you into your 5K. And people who would use this more likely would be something on the slow twitch muscle fiber who has a really big background in endurance and has a lot of aerobic capacity, where they would want to work at a higher volume and work their way down, and they're just going to respond a little bit better. So if that's you, that means you would prefer running longer, running slower, doing events like marathons, or you just know that you don't have that natural leg turnover. So this is the top-down approach would be a great place for someone like you to start. And what this looks like in practice, it would be something like you would start the progression with threshold repeats, 3x2 mile with about 2 minutes rest. And then from there, you'd move into 4x mile at just under your threshold. So thinking like 15K pace, and with that same amount of, and this would be about a minute or a minute 15 of rest. And then you would also introduce some speed intervals into this and doing 2x1000 at 10K pace. And then you can move in directly into 10K pace, which again is just getting closer to the 5K pace, which you are ultimately going to want to, which you're ultimately training for. I'm looking like 6x1200 at 10K pace. And these are straight up VO2 max intervals almost at this point. So you're going to want a lot of recovery here, giving yourself about 3 minutes rest. And then some mixed intervals, again, to introduce some of that 5K speed. So 4x1200 at 10K, 2x800 at 5K, and then getting into these like race intervals, which would be 5x1000 at 5K pace, whatever that goal pace would be, or whatever you've worked yourself into throughout this progression. From a bottom-up standpoint, it's going to be a bit of the opposite. So if you tend to prefer faster workouts, or you have some good natural leg turnover, you'll probably want to work with this bottom up. But this is for a marathon progression. So this could also be if you are coming from lower volume overall and you want to slowly build into a progression to get you to that longer tempo run, which you'd want to be for a long where you'd want to be getting ready for the race. So this one's straightforward with marathon pace. So it's just going to start with tempo runs. So it's going to be starting with a 5 mile tempo, work up to 7, 9, 11, and 13. So that's basically all bottom up means, is adding the volume into and kind of slowing and like starting at a faster pace and then slowly adding in to your race specific. So if this would look like a 5K, you would start with something like 400s at 3K pace and trying to drive up into, again, those thousands at 5K pace. And the last example I have here is an undulated 10K progression. And this is going to take a little bit more time to reach your goal. And again, this hasn't shown a lot of scientific evidence behind the efficacy of undulated progression when it comes to endurance, but there is a lot in terms of hypertrophy and strength training. So there is some evidence that this will work for adaptation. For endurance, though, it's going to take a little bit longer, and you're going to want to make sure that you are setting up a longer term plan just to give yourself time to work your way into that specific race pace. So you could start at something like a 6 mile tempo at half marathon pace. And then next week, you're going to move into intervals, which will be faster turnover at 5K pace, 12 by 400 at 5K pace with 400 recovery would be a good place. So these are kind of opposite ends of the spectrum when it comes to your training. So one would be higher volume, one is going to be higher intensity. So it's going to kind of go up and down based on the week to week. And then you'll move back up into threshold intervals, but not as high of a volume as the tempo run. Then you're going to move it back down into 800 at 10K pace. So you can see that you're kind of closing the gap here, and these workouts are going to start to similarly come together. And then you'll move into some more threshold repeats, and then more race specific intervals, 8 by 1000 at 10K pace, and ultimately kind of blending the two together at 3 by 2 mile at 10K pace. So that's what an undulated progression is typically going to look like when it comes to endurance. And for the sake of your training, this would be if you like variety, if you're not quite sure how you respond to each type of training, this will give you a good dose of both back and forth. So one, you get a chance to learn more about yourself if you prefer longer tempo type runs or if you prefer the speed type runs. And it also is going to, if you have more time and you want to set up a longer type of progression in here, the undulated will work pretty well. So this is what a basic periodization progression will look like for the endurance athlete. So I really suggest that you play around with this, but no matter what you do, make sure you are adding either volume or intensity or reducing the rest, no matter what you're doing week to week. If you are sitting with the same type of workout and you like the workout 8x800, you must make sure that you're changing something within that to create an overload, which will get that adaptation that you're looking for. And after about 4 to 6 weeks, you need to change the workout. It doesn't matter if you like sitting there, if you're getting great results, you will reach a plateau if you keep doing the same key workouts over and over and over. You can always come back to those after a second mesocycle and reset your paces after you've become faster. So for example, if you do that, the top down 5K speed progression and you got tremendous results from it, you need to take some time down and you could work on something else using a bottom up threshold or a bottom up marathon type, whatever it is that you need to work on moving into next. You could always come back to that progression that worked for you so well in the previous weeks. And you should have better fitness by then, so you can kind of reset the paces and continue to create that overload to get that adaptation. So find something that works for you and really play around with this, because there are a lot of ways, almost unlimited ways for you to set up your progression within a periodized plan. So really play around with that and see what works and what you like best. So if you like this video, hit me with subscribe, hit me with a thumbs up. There's a little bell there that will get you all the notifications when new videos do drop for us, so that you can get all the newest and latest things on running and training. All right, I will talk to you then.